Welcome back, and joining me for a look at the day's markets action is Sasfin Wealth's Muhammed Wagley. Thank you so much for your time, Muhammad. Quite a mixed picture that we are seeing there in the markets, but I mean, quite pleasing to see green on the JSE. But really, how are you gauging how markets are reacting to Donald Trump's tariff hike threats or promises?
It's quite an interesting one, Zinati. First of all, always a pleasure to be on the show. But I must say, I thought we'd be looking at a little bit more red, subsequent to the rhetoric that we saw from Mr. Trump yesterday after his first day in office. I think broadly speaking, perhaps the market may have anticipated the tariffs to be a little bit worse. I think in terms of growth, it's probably not going to affect the Americans maybe as much as it affects some of the other emerging markets. But even then, I did not expect to see pretty much green across the board today here in the JSE. So I think maybe in terms of how this is going to play out, we need to see sort of a little bit more detail. What I do think is going to happen is that probably our PGMs and maybe things that are a little bit sort of more integral for the states will probably be relatively insulated. Where we'll see a bit more of an impact will be things like sort of your automobile manufacturers and that sort of thing. They'll probably take a little bit more of a hit. But again, it does remain to be seen sort of the little intricacies of how this is actually going to affect us. If you had to have a look at the markets today, you'd think probably not at all, but as we know, that's not really the case.
All right. Well, let's get into the results that we saw coming out of the JSE, starting off with Hospital Group Life Healthcare that released its annual results today. We did see them posting double-digit growth from the top to the bottom line. They increased their final dividend and also paid a special dividend. The last time I checked, I saw that markets had rewarded the company with the stock up at 2%. Valid?
Yeah, no, very, very strong sets of numbers. Revenue was up by about 12.7%. I think really what was driving growth was the increased sales of Neurosec doses. Now, essentially what this is basically a diagnostic test, early detection for Alzheimer's. Now, needless to say, that is really a prevalent disease, and if I could compare it, I'd say think what Ozempic is to sort of Novo Nordisk, that's what Neurosec is to Life Healthcare. So we saw massive growth there. If you look at it from a headline perspective, HIPS was up 73%, so broadly speaking, really great set of numbers. You mentioned the dividend as well, bearing in mind earlier in the year, they did have a disposal of AMG. I think that was in January, and a lot of those proceeds also went to the dividends. I think sort of come the end of the year, they'll have paid out nearly 10.6 billion rand in divvies this year, which is incredible to see. The real reward for the shareholders.
All right. Well, let's get into property counter. Vukile seeming to be one of the more resilient ones in the sector. That growth momentum continuing in this interim period as well. Financial metrics there in positive territory. We saw occupancy levels quite high and vacancy levels quite low. Is Vukile's momentum at this stage really just unstoppable?
Well, that's definitely what it looks like. And if you look at these numbers, like I've not really picked up anything that will say that, there's a sort of a stop or a break in the momentum to come. Another thing worth mentioning is that they've expanded into Portugal as well. You mentioned those low vacancy rates, the improved cost to income ratio. These are all sort of key metrics when it comes to property counters, and they're doing sort of phenomenally in that respect. I think the one sort of somewhat negative news was that the NAV did fall by about 1%, but I was quite happy with the explanation there, which was simply that near half the business is now in Spain, and the rand's been relatively strong, so that sort of stronger rand did put a little bit of pressure on them, so there was a slight decrease there in the NAV. I think it was just about a percent drop, but broadly speaking, painted quite a pretty picture for Vukile, and that's on the back of, as you say, quite a bit of momentum.
All right. We'll talk about momentum that doesn't really seem to be moving as fast as maybe its investors would like. Zeda, they released annual results today. They did get record revenue, but that didn't filter through. We did have a decline in operating profit, but also double-digit decline in the bottom line. This car definitely not on the fast lane at this stage.
Yeah, I think that's apt, So they pointed to sort of a challenging market environment. They mentioned the higher interest rates, inflation, the fuel hikes, that sort of thing. And, that does compute, but we are sort of seeing some competitors do well sort of despite those challenging environments. And yes, the consumer has been under pressure with a lack of disposable income, but I think really what has proven to be challenging for them is sort of the entrance or the entry of sort of new players within that market. You think you have a look at the road and you see like loads of Chinese cars and things like that, filtering through. And I think that sort of thing has put quite a bit of pressure on them, and how they compete with that going forward is sort of going to be critical in maybe turning the picture around.
All right. We're talking about turning picture around, a Pepkor there. Of course, going from loss-making to profit-making, we did see revenue climbing 7.8%, but we did see a 0.4% decrease in HEPS there. But still, the stock surged 5%. What did investors hold on to there?
It seems like, they beat sort of pretty much across the board, and I think that was something that the investors quite like the market in general did. I think broadly speaking, where they did really well was, in their cost-cutting measures and improving the margins, and for a group that, pride themselves on bringing value to customers, that's obviously where they want to be ticking up. And I think the market responded very well to that. In terms of the outlook, it was quite optimistic. They're looking to open between 250 to 300 new stores in the next year. And, they also declared a cash dividend. There was actually quite a bit to like in these numbers. So no surprise to me.
Okay, what else do you like your stock pick for today?
So I am, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, I'm going to go for Novo Nordisk. So the share's done about 11% year to date, which is nothing to laugh at, but I do think that it's still quite a bit of room to go here. Now, obviously, the main driver for the growth here is the weight loss drugs, and Novo Nordisk is the producer of Ozempic. I just don't see this trend going anywhere, and I think the market's going to continue growing. So at current levels, it really is quite attractive. They're well off their all-time high, which was back in June. And, if I've not got any exposure here, I'd definitely be looking to pick some up.
All right.
So that's the way.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights there on what has moved investors' money today, Muhammad. That was Muhammed Wagley from Sasfin Wealth.